The crack of a gunshot pierced the dawn silence as Abigail Blackwell crouched behind the overturned wagon, her trembling hands clutching the worn photograph of her father, the only possession she had left after bandits ambushed their homestead 3 days prior. The Arizona Territory of 1883 had promised them a new beginning, but now, at 22, Abigail faced the desolate reality of being utterly alone with her family's debt collectors circling like vultures over the remains of her shattered dreams. "They're coming back. Move, miss." A deep voice cut through her panic as a strong hand gripped her arm, pulling her from her hiding place. Through tears and dust, Abigail glimpsed her rescuer, a tall figure silhouetted against the rising sun, his features obscured by a wide-brimmed Stetson. Abigail stumbled to her feet, her dusty skirts tangling around her ankles as the stranger led her to a dappled gray horse waiting in the shadow of a rocky outcropping. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder behind them. "I can't leave the wagon," she protested weakly, knowing it contained the last of her worldly possessions. "Everything I have. There ain't much left to save, miss," he replied grimly, mounting his horse in one fluid motion before extending his hand down to her. "And they won't be showing mercy to a woman alone. Choose now your things or your life." Heart pounding, Abigail grasped his calloused hand and found herself swung up behind him, the horse already moving before she settled. She clutched at the man's leather vest as they galloped away from the road, the wagon growing smaller behind them. Her father's debts, the deed to worthless mining claims, the funeral costs she couldn't pay, all of it receded as they raced across the desert. "I don't even know your name," she managed through chattering teeth, the reality of her situation crashing down upon her like an avalanche. The rider glanced back, and for the first time, Abigail saw clear blue eyes beneath the hat brim. "Lucas Ross," he answered simply. "And you'd best hold on tighter, miss." "Blackwell. Abigail Blackwell," she replied, tightening her grip as they plunged into a narrow ravine. Her future had never looked so impossibly dark and hopeless as it did in that moment, yet she was alive, and that had to count for something. 2 hours of hard riding brought them to a small creek where Lucas finally slowed the horse to a walk. The sun had climbed high in the sky, its merciless heat beating down on the parched landscape. Abigail's throat was raw with thirst, her body aching from the unfamiliar rigors of horseback riding. "We'll rest here a spell," Lucas announced, dismounting with practiced ease before helping her down. Abigail's legs nearly buckled beneath her, and she would have fallen if not for his steadying hand. "Easy now. First time on horseback." "No," she replied, summoning what dignity remained. "But it's been some time." Lucas nodded, leading his horse to the creek. "Drink, Maverick," he murmured to the animal before turning his attention back to Abigail. In the clear light of day, she could see him properly tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and a jawline shadowed with stubble. His clothes were trail-worn but well-maintained: canvas trousers, a faded blue shirt, and a leather vest that had seen better days. A gun belt hung low on his hips, the pearl-handled revolver speaking of a man who knew its use. "Those men," Abigail began, sinking onto a nearby rock. "They'll take everything." "Likely already have," Lucas replied frankly, filling a canteen from the creek. He offered it to her first, a gesture of courtesy that surprised her. "Want to tell me why a young woman was traveling alone with bandits on her trail?" Abigail hesitated, weighing how much to share with this stranger. Yet he had saved her life, and the truth was hardly a secret. "My father died 3 weeks ago. Pneumonia. We were heading to Tucson, where he said he had mining interests that would pay our debts." She laughed bitterly. "What he didn't tell me was that the interests were worthless claims he'd bought with borrowed money." Lucas crouched before her, his expression unreadable. And those men, debt collectors, or hired guns for the collectors. Abigail looked down at her hands, filthy and scraped from the ordeal. They gave me 3 days to vacate our home in Nebraska after the funeral. I thought if I could just reach Arizona, I might salvage something. Nebraska's a long way, Lucas observed, pulling jerky and hardtack from his saddlebag. He offered her both without ceremony. You came all this way alone. We had a driver, but he abandoned us 2 days ago. Said he wasn't paid enough to deal with debt collectors. Abigail accepted the food gratefully, realizing she couldn't remember when she'd last eaten. I've been making slow progress since. Lucas settled beside her, chewing thoughtfully. Where were you headed specifically? Tombstone. Abigail pulled the crumpled deed from her pocket. Father said there were people there who might honor his claim, or at least buy it from me for enough to start over. Lucas's expression darkened. Tombstone's a hard town, especially for a woman alone. I'm aware, Abigail replied, her chin lifting slightly, but I have few choices left. They ate in silence for a few moments, the desert sounds filling the space between them. Finally, Lucas stood, brushing dust from his trousers. I'm heading that way myself. Tombstone's about 3 days' ride from here, if we're careful and the weather holds. Hope flickered in Abigail's chest. You'd take me there. Can't rightly leave you out here to die, he said pragmatically. But you should know those mining claims your father bought. Chances are they're not worth the paper they're printed on. I have to try, Abigail insisted. It's all I have left. Lucas studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Rest a bit longer. We'll need to cover more ground before nightfall. As Lucas tended to his horse, Abigail assessed her situation. Her clothing, a practical traveling dress of brown cotton, was torn and filthy. Her boots, at least, were sturdy enough for the journey. The small reticule tied at her waist contained her meager savings, $3.27. Not enough for a fresh start, certainly not enough for a ticket back east, even if she had somewhere to go. Mr. Ross, she ventured when he returned, I want to thank you for your help. I can pay you something for your trouble when we reach Tombstone. Lucas shook his head. Save your money, Miss Blackwell. You'll need every cent. I insist on repaying you somehow, she persisted. I don't accept charity. A hint of amusement crossed his face. Stubborn, aren't you? Well, you can help with making camp and cooking along the way. That'll be payment enough. By mid-afternoon, they were moving again, Abigail seated behind Lucas, her initial discomfort giving way to a grudging acceptance of their proximity. The landscape shifted from rocky ravines to saguaro-studded plains, the vastness of the territory both beautiful and terrifying in its emptiness. Have you been in Arizona long? Abigail asked, breaking the hours of silence. 5 years, Lucas replied. Before that, Texas. Before that, wherever the Army sent me. You were a soldier, Union cavalry, got out in '68. 15 years since the war ended, Abigail calculated. He must have been quite young when he enlisted. And now I work when I need to, ranch hand mostly. Some scouting for the Army when they're tracking hostiles. He adjusted his hat against the glare. Been doing some prospecting myself lately. For gold, silver, mostly. These hills have given up a fair share to those patient enough to look. Is that why you're headed to Tombstone? The silver mines. Lucas was quiet for so long that Abigail thought he might not answer. Not exactly, he finally said. Got business with someone there. Personal business. The tone of his voice discouraged further questions, and Abigail let the conversation lapse. The rhythm of the horse's gait and the heat of the day eventually lulled her into a drowsy state, and she found herself leaning more heavily against Lucas's back, her cheek pressed against the rough fabric of his vest. She jerked awake when the horse stopped, embarrassed to realize she'd fallen asleep. The sun was low on the horizon, painting the desert in gold and crimson. "We'll make camp here," Lucas announced, gesturing to a protected hollow beneath a sandstone outcropping. "There's enough brush for a small fire, and we're sheltered from view of the trail." Abigail slid from the horse awkwardly, her muscles protesting the long day's ride. Determined to prove useful, she immediately began gathering twigs and dry brush for the fire while Lucas unsaddled Maverick and set up a simple camp. "You've done this before," Lucas observed as she efficiently arranged the kindling. "My father and I camped during our journey west," she explained. "He taught me what he knew, which wasn't much, but enough to be practical." She hesitated, then added, "My mother died when I was 16. After that, I took over managing our household. Father never remarried." Lucas nodded, striking a match to light the fire. "My condolences. Thank you." Abigail watched the flames catch and grow. "What about your family?" "Don't have much of one left," he said shortly. "Parents gone. Had a brother but lost track of him after the war." Sensing his reluctance to elaborate, Abigail changed the subject. "What can I help with for supper?" Their meal was simple, more jerky, hardtack softened over the fire, and coffee that Lucas brewed with practiced efficiency. As night descended fully, the desert transformed around them, temperature plummeting as stars emerged in brilliant profusion overhead. "It's beautiful," Abigail murmured, gazing upward. "I've never seen so many stars." "One good thing about this country," Lucas agreed. "You can see forever on a clear night." The fire crackled between them, casting flickering shadows across his face. In that moment, Abigail realized how completely she had placed her trust in this stranger. Lucas Ross could be anyone: an outlaw, a murderer, a man of ill repute. Yet something in his manner, in the quiet competence with which he moved through this harsh land, reassured her. "Mr. Ross," she began carefully, "may I ask why you helped me? You could have ridden past. Most would have." Lucas poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "I've seen what happens to people left alone out here. Wouldn't wish that on anyone." "Is that the only reason?" His blue eyes met hers across the flames. "Isn't that enough?" Abigail nodded slowly. "Yes, I suppose it is." Lucas stood, reaching for his bedroll. "You take this. I'll keep watch for a while. But you need rest too." "I'm used to short nights," he interrupted. "Been sleeping with one eye open since the war." Reluctantly, Abigail accepted the bedroll, arranging it near the fire. Exhaustion washed over her as soon as she lay down, the events of the day catching up all at once. Through half-closed eyes, she watched Lucas settle against a boulder, his rifle across his knees, face turned toward the dark expanse of desert beyond their small circle of light. "Thank you," she whispered, already drifting toward sleep. "For everything." If he replied, she didn't hear it. Morning came with startling abruptness, the eastern sky blazing pink and orange as Abigail blinked awake. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was, or why her body ached so profoundly. Then reality returned with painful clarity: her father's death, the bandits, the cowboy who had rescued her. Lucas was already up, tending to Maverick and repacking their meager supplies. He acknowledged her with a nod when she rose stiffly from the bedroll. "There's coffee left," he said, gesturing to the small pot nestled in the embers of last night's fire. "And water to wash up a bit if you want." Grateful for the thoughtfulness, Abigail took a few minutes to make herself presentable, using her handkerchief and a splash of precious water to clean her face and hands. Her hair, once neatly pinned, had come loose during yesterday's flight. She rebraided it as best she could without a mirror, securing it at the nape of her neck with the few remaining pins. "Ready to move on?" Lucas asked when she approached him, carrying the empty coffee cup. "Yes." She squared her shoulders, determined not to be a burden. "How far to the next town?" "We'll reach Contention City by nightfall if we push hard," he replied, helping her mount before swinging up behind her. Today, he positioned her in front of him on the saddle, a gesture she recognized as consideration for her comfort. "Might be able to get you some proper supplies there." "I can't afford. I said I'd get you to Tombstone," Lucas cut in. "That includes making sure you don't arrive half dead from hunger or exposure." They rode in silence for the first few hours, the desert gradually awakening around them as the sun climbed. Abigail found herself studying the landscape with new eyes, noticing how life persisted even in this seemingly barren place. Cactus flowers blooming in vibrant defiance of the heat, lizards darting across sun-baked rocks, hawks circling lazily overhead. "It's not what I expected," she admitted when they stopped briefly to rest the horse. "Arizona, I mean. It's beautiful in its way." Lucas handed her the canteen. "Takes getting used to. Most folks only see what's lacking: trees, water, green things. They miss what's actually here." "And what's that?" "Space," he said simply. "Room to breathe. Room to be who you are without someone else's notions pressing down on you." Abigail considered this as they continued their journey. The open country certainly offered a freedom she'd never experienced in Nebraska, where neighbors' opinions and social obligations had shaped every aspect of her life. Even in her grief and uncertainty, she could appreciate the raw honesty of this land. By midday, the heat had become oppressive, the sun beating down mercilessly from directly overhead. Lucas guided Maverick toward a cluster of rocks that offered minimal shade, dismounting and helping Abigail down. "Rest here," he instructed, removing his bandana and soaking it with water from the canteen. "Put this on the back of your neck. It'll help." Abigail accepted gratefully, the cool cloth bringing immediate relief. "How much farther to Contention City?" "Another 4, maybe 5 hours." Lucas frowned, studying the sky. "Weather's turning, though." Abigail followed his gaze but saw only cloudless blue. "It looks clear to me." "Not for long. Feel that," he gestured broadly. "Wind's shifting. There's dust coming." As if summoned by his words, a hot gust swept past them, carrying fine particles that stung Abigail's eyes and skin. In the distance, the horizon had taken on an ominous yellowish tinge. "A dust storm?" she asked, anxiety rising. Lucas nodded grimly. "We need to find better shelter before it hits." "This won't do." They remounted quickly, Maverick seeming to sense the urgency as Lucas urged him into a faster pace. The wind strengthened with each passing minute, whipping Abigail's skirts and tugging at Lucas's hat. The sky darkened perceptibly, not with clouds but with an approaching wall of dust that loomed larger by the moment. "There!" Lucas shouted over the rising wind, pointing to a formation of rocks with a visible overhang. "That'll have to do." They reached the shelter just as the storm descended in earnest, a howling maelstrom of dust and debris that reduced visibility to arm's length. Lucas swiftly led Maverick into the deepest part of the overhang, then helped Abigail dismount. They huddled together against the rock wall, Lucas removing his bandana again to tie it over Abigail's nose and mouth. "Breathe through this," he instructed, fashioning a similar protection for himself from a spare neckerchief. "Dust'll choke you otherwise." The storm's fury intensified, wind screaming around their shelter as particles of sand and dirt found their way into every crevice and fold of clothing. Maverick stood stoically with his back to the wind, head lowered against the onslaught. Abigail, despite the bandana, found herself coughing as the finest dust penetrated their inadequate shelter. Without warning, Lucas pulled her closer, turning his body to shield her from the worst of the storm. Abigail stiffened momentarily, unaccustomed to such proximity with a man who wasn't family, but the practical necessity of their situation quickly overcame her hesitation. She leaned into his protection gratefully, closing her eyes against the stinging particles. How long will it last? She called over the wind's roar. Could be minutes, could be hours, Lucas replied, his voice close to her ear. These storms do as they please. They remained huddled together as the minutes stretched painfully. The light dimmed further until it seemed like twilight, the world beyond their shelter completely obscured by swirling dust. Abigail became acutely aware of Lucas's steady presence, the solid warmth of him, the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest against her back, the faint scent of leather and tobacco that clung to his clothing despite the pervasive dust. "Tell me about Nebraska," he said suddenly, clearly attempting to distract her from their predicament. "What's it like there?" Grateful for the conversation, Abigail described her hometown, the rolling prairies, the small but respectable house where she'd grown up, the church socials and harvest festivals that had marked the passing seasons. As she spoke, memories both sweet and painful surfaced. Her mother teaching her to bake bread in their sunny kitchen, her father's pride when she mastered a difficult piano piece, the gradual decline of their fortunes after her mother's death. "Father tried his best," she said softly, "but he was never good with money. After Mother died, he started making risky investments, always chasing the next opportunity that would restore what we'd lost. And the mining claims were the last of those opportunities," Lucas concluded. Abigail nodded, forgetting he couldn't see the gesture with her back to him. "Yes, he was so certain they would save us. I didn't know until after he died how deeply in debt we truly were." The storm's fury began to abate slightly, the howling wind diminishing to a persistent moan. Lucas shifted, peering out from their shelter. "Worst is passing," he reported, "but we've lost too much daylight. Contention City's out of reach today." Abigail's heart sank at the news. "We'll have to camp again." "Afraid so. Once it's clear enough to move, we'll find better shelter for the night." Lucas released her slowly, and Abigail felt the absence of his warmth immediately. "You all right?" "Yes," she assured him, though in truth she felt thoroughly miserable, coated in dust, parched despite their water conservation, and now facing another night under the stars instead of the relative comfort of even a frontier town. But complaining would solve nothing, and she was determined to maintain what dignity remained to her. An hour later, the dust had settled enough for them to continue, though the air remained hazy and breathing was still difficult. They moved slower now, Maverick showing signs of fatigue after battling the storm. Lucas led them to a small canyon where a seasonal stream had carved a depression in the rock, now dry, but offering better protection than their previous night's camp. "We'll still reach Tombstone tomorrow?" Abigail asked as they established their camp. "Day after," Lucas corrected, unsaddling Maverick. "The storm set us back. We'll hit Contention City tomorrow, then Tombstone the following afternoon." Disappointment must have shown on her face, for he added, "Another day won't change what's waiting for you there, Miss Blackwell. Please call me Abigail," she said impulsively. After sharing a dust storm, Miss Blackwell seems overly formal. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Abigail, then. And I'm Lucas." Their evening routine established itself naturally, Lucas tending to Maverick and securing the perimeter while Abigail gathered what fuel she could find and prepared their simple meal. The dust storm had left everything with a coating of fine silt, and Abigail used precious water to clean their cooking implements as best she could. "You mentioned prospecting," she said as they ate, curious about the man who had become her unexpected protector. "Have you had any success?" Lucas shrugged. Found enough to keep me going, nothing that would make a man rich. Is that what you're looking for, riches? No, he gazed into the fire. Just enough to buy some land eventually. A small ranch, maybe, something that's mine. You didn't want to claim homestead land. Government and I have different ideas about ownership. His tone suggested a deeper story, but he didn't elaborate. Instead, he asked, "What about you? What were your plans before all this?" The question caught Abigail off guard. For so long, her life had been defined by duty, first to her ailing mother, then to her increasingly desperate father. Her own desires had been set aside so completely that she struggled to recall them now. "I taught school for a time," she said finally. "I enjoyed it. The children, the books, watching minds open to new ideas." She smiled at the memory. "I had to give it up when Father's health declined. You could teach again. Towns out here are always looking for school teachers." Abigail considered this possibility. Perhaps. "Though I imagine Tombstone already has a school." "It does," Lucas confirmed. "But it's a growing place. Might be opportunities." For the first time since her father's death, Abigail allowed herself to consider a future that wasn't simply about survival or debt. Could she build a new life here in this harsh but oddly compelling territory? The thought both frightened and exhilarated her. "Tell me about Tombstone," she requested. "What should I expect?" Lucas's description painted a vivid picture of a boomtown in transition, still rough around the edges with its saloons and gambling halls, but increasingly civilized with proper businesses, churches, and even a newspaper. Silver had transformed it from a remote outpost to a thriving community in just a few short years. "It's not without dangers," he cautioned. "Mining towns attract all sorts fortune seekers, gamblers, men running from something. But there are decent folks, too, trying to build something lasting." "And which are you?" Abigail asked boldly, immediately regretting the presumption. "I'm sorry, that was impertinent." But Lucas didn't seem offended. "Fair question. I've been both at different times." He met her gaze steadily. "These days, I'm trying to be among the decent folks." Something in his tone suggested a hard-won peace, a deliberate choice made after experiencing the alternatives. Abigail found herself wanting to know more about his journey, but sensed this wasn't the time to press further. Instead, she asked about practical matters, where she might find lodging in Tombstone, who might be approached about her father's mining claims, what work might be available for a woman of her limited skills. Lucas answered each question thoughtfully, offering suggestions that revealed his thorough knowledge of the town and its inhabitants. "The Continental Hotel might be a good starting point," he advised. "It's respectable but not too dear. The owner, Mrs. Sullivan, occasionally needs help with cleaning or serving. That could tide you over while you look for teaching work." "You've thought this through," Abigail observed, touched by his consideration. Lucas shrugged. "Just practical matters." As night deepened around them, conversation gradually waned, replaced by the subtle sounds of the desert, the distant yip of coyotes, the rustle of nocturnal creatures emerging from their daytime hiding places, the soft shifting of sand in the persistent breeze. Abigail found herself lulled by the peacefulness, her earlier anxiety receding. "I'll take first watch again," Lucas announced, rising from his place by the fire. "Try to get some sleep." "Wake me for the second watch," Abigail insisted. "You need rest too." Lucas looked like he might argue, then nodded. "All right, in a few hours." But when Abigail awoke to gray pre-dawn light, she realized Lucas had let her sleep through the night. He sat where she had last seen him, back against a boulder, rifle across his knees. Only the tiredness around his eyes betrayed his vigilance. "You should have woken me," she chided softly, sitting up. "Wasn't necessary," he replied, standing and stretching cramped muscles. "Sleep well. Better than I had any right to, given the circumstances. Abigail rose, brushing dust from her dress in a futile attempt at tidiness. Thank you for letting me rest. Lucas merely nodded, already busy preparing for departure. They shared a quick breakfast of the last hardtack and jerky, washing it down with coffee that tasted of dust, despite their best efforts. Contention City has a decent cafe, Lucas promised as they mounted up. We'll get a proper meal there. The landscape changed subtly as they rode, rocky desert giving way to scrubby grasslands dotted with occasional stands of mesquite. In the distance, low mountains rose against the horizon, their slopes tinged purple in the morning light. The San Pedro Valley, Lucas explained, following her gaze. River runs through it, though you'd hardly call it that most of the year. Still, it's why settlements grew here. It's unexpected, Abigail remarked. I thought Arizona was all desert, common mistake. Territories got everything from pine forests up north to grasslands like these. Desert too, of course, but even that changes depending where you are. By midday, they caught their first glimpse of Contention City, a collection of wooden buildings clustered near the meager San Pedro River, with a stagecoach road running straight through its center. Even from a distance, Abigail could see it was a fraction of the size she had imagined. It's so small, she said, unable to hide her disappointment. Just a way station, really, Lucas confirmed. But it's got what we need: food, supplies, maybe a bath if you're wanting one. The prospect of washing away days of trail dust was so appealing that Abigail nearly urged Maverick to a faster pace herself. They entered the town shortly after noon, drawing curious glances from the few residents visible on the dusty street. Lucas guided them directly to a combined livery and blacksmith shop, where he dismounted and helped Abigail down. "Jake," he called to the burly man working at a forge. "Got time to look after my horse?" The blacksmith straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "Lucas Ross, as I live and breathe." "Thought you were up Prescott Way." "Was, headed to Tombstone now." Lucas clasped the man's hand briefly. "How's business?" "Steady enough." Jake's curious gaze shifted to Abigail. "Who's your companion?" "Miss Abigail Blackwell," Lucas introduced her. "Miss Blackwell, Jake Miller, finest blacksmith between Tucson and Tombstone." "Madam," Jake nodded respectfully, though his expression remained openly curious. "You folks staying the night?" "Just long enough to resupply and rest a bit," Lucas replied. Maverick could use a good rub-down and fresh feed. Business concluded with the blacksmith, Lucas led Abigail to a modest building bearing a hand-painted sign, "Miller's Cafe and Boarding House." "Jake's wife runs it," Lucas explained. "Simple but clean. You can wash up while I see about supplies." The interior of the cafe was surprisingly pleasant: 4 tables covered with checkered cloths, curtains at the windows, and a delicious aroma emanating from the kitchen at the rear. A plump, energetic woman emerged at the sound of the bell above the door, her welcoming smile broadening when she recognized Lucas. "Well now, here's a sight. Lucas Ross, you rascal, where have you been keeping yourself?" She embraced him warmly before turning her attention to Abigail. "And who's this lovely young lady?" "Sarah, this is Miss Abigail Blackwell," Lucas said. "Abigail Sarah Miller, best cook in the territory and no mistake." "Flatterer," Sarah laughed, though she clearly appreciated the compliment. Her assessing gaze took in Abigail's travel-worn appearance with sympathetic understanding. "You look like you could use a good meal and a wash, honey. We've got both." Within minutes, Abigail found herself ushered into a small but clean room upstairs, provided with a basin of hot water, soap, and fresh towels. The luxury of washing away days of dust and grime nearly brought tears to her eyes. She did the best she could with her clothing, sponging off the worst of the dirt and shaking out her skirts, wishing desperately for a change of clothes. When she descended to the cafe again, feeling somewhat refreshed, she found Lucas already seated at a table, a steaming plate of food before him. Another place was set opposite him, and Sarah appeared almost immediately with a second plate heaped with roast beef, potatoes, and greens. "Eat up," the older woman encouraged. "You look like you haven't had a proper meal in days." "We haven't," Abigail admitted, taking her seat. "This looks wonderful, Mrs. Miller." "Sarah, please. Any friend of Lucas is a friend of mine." As they ate, Abigail became aware of the subtle glances from the cafe's few other patrons' curious looks that assessed her relationship with Lucas. She realized suddenly how their arrival together must appear to strangers. A man and woman, obviously traveling companions, both dusty from the trail. Heat rose in her cheeks at the implication. Lucas seemed unconcerned by the scrutiny, focused entirely on his meal. Only when Sarah returned with coffee did he address the unspoken questions. "Miss Blackwell's father recently passed," he explained quietly. "She's traveling to Tombstone to settle some business matters. I'm escorting her there." Sarah's expression softened with immediate sympathy. "I'm sorry for your loss, honey. Traveling alone is hard enough without grief weighing on you." "Thank you," Abigail murmured, touched by the woman's kindness. "Mr. Ross has been most helpful." "That doesn't surprise me a bit," Sarah replied, patting Lucas's shoulder. "This one's got a good heart, no matter how he tries to hide it." Lucas shifted uncomfortably at the praise. "Sarah, is there somewhere Miss Blackwell could rest for a few hours? We'll be moving on before sunset, of course. The room upstairs is yours until you leave." Sarah turned to Abigail. "And if you'd like, I could press your dress while you rest. Got an iron heating right now." Overwhelmed by such unexpected consideration, Abigail could only nod gratefully. While Abigail rested upstairs, Lucas took the opportunity to purchase supplies for the remainder of their journey: food, ammunition, and a few small comforts he thought might make the traveling easier for his companion. He also sent a telegram to an acquaintance in Tombstone, making discreet inquiries about Jeremiah Blackwell's mining claims. The response came swiftly and confirmed his suspicions. The claims were worthless, sold by a notorious swindler who had disappeared months ago. Lucas frowned at the paper, considering how best to prepare Abigail for this news. He had seen too many dreams shattered in these boom towns, too many hopeful souls crushed by the harsh realities of frontier speculation. When Abigail rejoined him late in the afternoon, she looked markedly better rested, her dress noticeably cleaner and pressed, her hair neatly arranged. Something in Lucas's chest tightened at the sight of her, a feeling he hadn't experienced in longer than he cared to remember. "You look refreshed," he managed, mentally cursing his sudden awkwardness. "I feel human again," she replied with a smile that transformed her face, revealing a dimple in her right cheek. "Mrs. Miller Sarah was wonderfully kind." "She's good people," Lucas agreed, ready to move on. "We can cover a few more hours before dark." They said their goodbyes to the Millers, promising to stop again on any future journeys through Contention City. Maverick, well rested and fed, seemed eager to resume their travels, prancing slightly as Lucas tightened the cinch. "Sarah sent food for our supper," Abigail said as they mounted up, patting the small bundle secured to the saddle. "And she refused payment, said it was a gift." "That's Sarah," Lucas replied, guiding Maverick back to the main road. "Been feeding strays and travelers for as long as I've known her." "Is that how you met? Passing through?" Lucas nodded. 4 years back. I was in worse shape than you were 3 days without food after my previous horse went lame and had to be put down. Jake found me collapsed on the road, brought me to Sarah. They nursed me back to health. They seem to think highly of you. Good people see the best in others, Lucas said simply, even when it's not deserved. Abigail studied his profile, wondering at the story behind those words. I think their judgment is sound. Lucas made no reply, but Abigail noticed a slight relaxation in his posture, as though her words had eased some invisible tension. They rode in companionable silence as the afternoon waned, the landscape gradually shifting back toward the rocky terrain they had traversed earlier. The road became more defined as they approached the more heavily traveled routes near Tombstone, and occasionally they passed other travelers' freight wagons, solitary riders, once a stagecoach that thundered past in a cloud of dust. As dusk approached, Lucas guided them off the main road toward a small cluster of cottonwood trees marking a seasonal waterhole. The ground showed signs of previous campers, a circle of stones for a fire pit, remnants of old campfires, paths worn by horses and men. Popular stopping place, Lucas explained as they dismounted. Water's reliable most of the year. Sure enough, a small pool of clear water nestled among the rocks, fed by a spring that emerged from the hillside. Abigail knelt beside it, trailing her fingers through the cool liquid with simple pleasure. It's lovely, she said, watching the last sunlight filter through the cottonwood leaves above. Almost like a little oasis. Lucas smiled faintly at her description. That's exactly what it is. Desert travelers have been stopping here for centuries. Apache called it speaking waters because of the sound it makes in the quiet. Abigail listened, hearing the gentle gurgle as water trickled over stones. They named it well. Their camp established with practiced efficiency, they settled beside the fire to enjoy Sarah's provisions: cold fried chicken, corn bread, and apple pie carefully wrapped in waxed paper. After days of jerky and hardtack, the meal seemed impossibly luxurious. Tomorrow we reach Tombstone, Abigail said, breaking a long but comfortable silence. What will you do once you've delivered me safely? Lucas poked at the fire, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. Got that personal business to attend to. After that, not sure. Might head north to the Bradshaw Mountains. Heard there's good prospects there. More silver hunting, maybe, or ranch work if I can find it. Abigail hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind since Contention City. Lucas, you received a telegram while I was resting, didn't you? I saw the paper in your pocket. He looked up sharply. You have keen eyes. Was it about my father's claims? Lucas sighed, setting aside his plate. Yes. They're worthless, aren't they? Abigail's voice remained steady, though her hands trembled slightly. I suspected as much, but I needed to hope. I'm sorry, Abigail. Lucas pulled the telegram from his pocket, offering it to her. Man who sold them to your father was a known swindler, disappeared months ago. Abigail took the paper but didn't immediately read it, instead staring into the fire. I should have known. Father always was too trusting, too willing to believe in easy solutions. She looked up, meeting Lucas's concerned gaze. What do I do now? The vulnerability in her question struck Lucas with unexpected force. This woman who had endured loss, betrayal, and days of difficult travel now looked to him for guidance, a drifter with his own troubled past and uncertain future. You start over, he said finally. Tombstone's growing fast. Needs people with skills, education. You mentioned teaching the school might need help, or there's work in the hotels, the shops. As a maid or laundress, you mean? There was no bitterness in her tone, just pragmatic acceptance. To begin with, maybe, but you're educated, well-spoken. Won't take long for folks to see your worth. Abigail nodded slowly, the practical part of her mind already calculating possibilities. $3.27 wouldn't last long, even in the most modest lodgings. She would need work immediately, any work available. "Thank you for being honest with me," she said finally, returning the telegram, "and for making inquiries on my behalf." Lucas shook his head. "Wish I had better news. The truth is better than false hope." Abigail managed a small smile. "And at least I know where I stand now, no more illusions." As darkness deepened around their camp, Abigail found herself studying Lucas with new awareness. The firelight cast his features in dramatic relief, the strong line of his jaw, the slight crease between his brows as he stared into the flames, the capable hands that had guided them safely through dangers she had barely comprehended. In just a few days, this stranger had become what? Not exactly a friend, but something equally significant. A constant in the shifting landscape of her new reality. Tomorrow they would reach Tombstone, and their paths would likely diverge. Lucas would attend to his mysterious personal business, and she would begin the daunting task of rebuilding her life from nothing. The thought left an unexpected hollow feeling in her chest. "I should thank you properly," she said suddenly, "for everything you've done. I would have died out there if not for you." Lucas looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Abigail replied firmly, "they wouldn't. You know that as well as I do." He acknowledged this truth with a slight nod. "Well, you've been good company." "Made the journey pleasant." "Pleasant?" Abigail laughed despite herself. "We've faced bandits, a dust storm, and days of hard travel. I'd hate to experience what you consider difficult." A rare grin transformed Lucas's face, erasing years of hard living and revealing glimpses of a younger, less guarded man. "Fair point, but I've had worse traveling companions." "As have I." Abigail's smile faded as she considered her uncertain future. "Lucas, when we reach Tombstone, might I ask one more favor? Name it. Would you help me find suitable lodgings? I don't know the town, and as a woman alone." She trailed off, hating her own vulnerability but unable to ignore the realities of her situation. "Of course," Lucas replied immediately. "I know a few respectable boarding houses. And I meant what I said about the Continental Hotel. Sarah Sullivan's a good woman. Might be willing to exchange work for a room until you find your feet." Relief washed over Abigail. "Thank you. Just until I establish myself." They settled into silence as the fire burned low, each lost in their own thoughts about the day to come. Abigail finally retired to her bedroll, but sleep proved elusive. Her mind raced with anxieties and plans, possibilities and fears. Through half-closed eyes, she watched Lucas maintain his now familiar vigil, his silhouette a reassuring presence against the star-filled sky. Morning arrived with the promise of conclusion, their journey's end just hours away. They broke camp efficiently, the routine now familiar between them. As they mounted up for the final leg of their journey, Abigail felt a curious mixture of anticipation and regret. "Nervous?" Lucas asked, noting her pensive expression. "A little," she admitted. "Everything changes today." "For the better," he assured her. "Tombstone's rough in spots, but it's full of opportunity for those willing to work." They rejoined the main road, now busier with traffic heading to and from the booming mining town. Freight wagons laden with supplies, mining equipment, and building materials trundled past. Riders on various errands moved with purpose, kicking up dust that hung in the still morning air. The increased activity signaled their proximity to civilization, and Abigail found herself straightening her posture, attempting to present a more dignified appearance despite her trail-worn clothing. By mid-morning, the landscape opened before them, revealing a sprawling settlement nestled in a broad valley. Buildings of varying sizes and conditions spread outward from a central business district, some constructed of proper lumber, others mere canvas and board affairs. Even from a distance, Abigail could see evidence of Tombstone's explosive growth, new construction alongside established businesses, streets laid out in a grid that extended beyond current needs in anticipation of continued expansion. "There it is," Lucas announced unnecessarily. "Tombstone." As they approached, details emerged more clearly. Church steeples rose above the commercial buildings. Smoke from countless chimneys and cook fires drifted skyward. The sounds of construction hammering, sawing, men shouting instructions carried on the still air. Abigail tried to reconcile this bustling community with the desperate hope that had driven her father to invest his last resources in worthless mining claims. They entered town via Allen Street, the main thoroughfare bustling with activity despite the early hour. Abigail absorbed impressions in rapid succession: a well-appointed hotel with a wide veranda, saloons already doing business, ladies in fashionable dress navigating the wooden sidewalks, miners and cowboys moving purposefully about their business. For all its frontier trappings, Tombstone possessed an energy and ambition that spoke of permanence rather than the transient quality of many boom towns. Lucas guided Maverick through the busy street with practiced ease, eventually stopping before a modest two-story building bearing the sign Continental Hotel. He dismounted, then helped Abigail down, steadying her when her legs threatened to buckle after the long ride. "You all right?" he asked quietly. "Just stiff," she assured him, though in truth she felt overwhelmed by the noise, the crowd, the sudden immersion in civilization after days in the wilderness. "This is the hotel you mentioned, Sarah Sullivan's place," Lucas confirmed. "Let me speak with her first." Abigail waited outside, acutely conscious of curious glances from passers-by. Her dusty, travel-worn appearance marked her as a newcomer, and she fought the urge to shrink from the scrutiny. Instead, she squared her shoulders and observed her surroundings with deliberate attention, noting details that might prove useful in the days ahead: the location of shops, the newspaper office, what appeared to be a school building in the distance. Lucas emerged from the hotel accompanied by a tall, silver-haired woman whose bearing suggested both authority and compassion. Her assessing gaze swept over Abigail, not unkindly but with practical evaluation. "Miss Blackwell," Lucas began, "this is Mrs. Sarah Sullivan, owner of the Continental." "Mrs. Sullivan, Miss Abigail Blackwell. Mr. Ross has explained your circumstances," Mrs. Sullivan said directly, extending her hand. "I'm very sorry about your father." "Thank you," Abigail replied, appreciating the straightforward approach. "Mr. Ross speaks highly of your establishment." "It's modest but respectable," Mrs. Sullivan stated. "And as it happens, I could use an extra pair of hands. My regular girl left last week married a miner with a strike-up Charleston way." She gestured toward the hotel. "If you're willing to help with cleaning rooms and serving meals, I can offer you lodging and board, plus $2 a week." The offer exceeded Abigail's immediate hopes. Room, board, and a small wage would allow her to establish herself while seeking more suitable employment. "I would be most grateful for the opportunity, Mrs. Sullivan." "Good." The older woman nodded briskly. "Come inside and I'll show you your quarters. You look like you could use a proper bath and a real bed." Abigail turned to Lucas, suddenly aware that their paths were about to diverge. "I don't know how to thank you properly." "No need," he replied, his expression uncharacteristically uncertain. "You're settled now, that's what matters." "Your personal business in town, will it keep you here long?" Lucas glanced away briefly. "Couple of days, most likely. Perhaps." "Perhaps we might speak again before you leave," Abigail suggested, surprised by her own boldness. I'd like to know you reached your next destination safely. Something flickered in Lucas's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or a warmer emotion she couldn't quite name. I'd like that. I'll stop by tomorrow if that's all right. Very well, tomorrow then. Impulsively, Abigail extended her hand. Thank you, Lucas, for everything. He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle around hers. Take care of yourself, Abigail, as Mrs. Sullivan led her into the hotel. Abigail glanced back once to see Lucas still standing where she'd left him, watching her departure with an expression she couldn't decipher from a distance. Then he turned toward his horse, and Abigail stepped across the threshold into her new life. The Continental Hotel proved to be exactly as described, modest but clean and well-maintained. Mrs. Sullivan showed Abigail to a small room on the second floor, sparsely furnished but private, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the side street. It's not fancy, the older woman apologized, but it's yours as long as you need it. It's perfect, Abigail assured her sincerely, thinking of the nights spent under open sky. When would you like me to begin my duties? Tomorrow's soon enough, Mrs. Sullivan replied kindly. Today, rest and get your bearings. There's a bathhouse through that door at the end of the hall, private for hotel guests and staff. Take your time. Left alone, Abigail sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the rapid changes in her circumstances. Just days ago, she had faced death in the desert, her future a dark and hopeless void. Now, through Lucas's intervention, she had shelter, employment, and the beginnings of a new life. The mining claims might be worthless, but she was alive, with opportunities before her that she hadn't dared imagine. The promised bath proved glorious hot water, proper soap, and enough privacy to thoroughly wash away the grime of travel. Afterward, she reluctantly donned her only dress again, vowing to purchase at least one change of clothing with her first wages. Clean and somewhat refreshed, she ventured downstairs to explore her new workplace. The hotel's main floor consisted of a modest lobby, a dining room currently being prepared for the midday meal, and Mrs. Sullivan's private quarters at the rear. Abigail introduced herself to the cook, a cheerful Mexican woman named Elena who spoke limited English, but conveyed through gestures that she welcomed the help. The handful of guests currently staying at the Continental appeared to be mostly traveling businessmen and a few respectable-looking women, whom Abigail guessed might be teachers or nurses. Gathering her courage, Abigail ventured outside to explore the immediate vicinity. Tombstone in full daylight was even more impressive than her first glimpse had suggested, a proper town with businesses, services, and amenities one might find in established Eastern communities. She noted the locations of several churches, the schoolhouse, a dressmaker's shop, for future reference when funds permitted, and the offices of the Tombstone Epitaph, the local newspaper. Returning to the hotel by mid-afternoon, Abigail found Mrs. Sullivan tallying accounts in a ledger. The older woman looked up at her entrance, offering a tired smile. "Exploring our fair city?" she asked. "Yes, it's more developed than I expected." "Growing every day," Mrs. Sullivan confirmed. 3 years ago, there was hardly anything here. Now look at us, churches, schools, even talk of a proper opera house. She closed her ledger with a decisive snap. "Did Lucas tell you how he came to bring you here?" "He said he found me when bandits were attacking my wagon," Abigail replied, uncertain of the question's purpose. Mrs. Sullivan studied her thoughtfully. "That man's a puzzle. Shows up every few months, never stays long, keeps his business to himself, but he's helped more than one person in trouble, asking nothing in return. He mentioned you've known him for some time. Going on 3 years now. He helped my late husband and me when we first opened this place, ran off some troublemakers who thought a widow woman's hotel would be easy pickings. Mrs. Sullivan's gaze grew distant with memory. Thomas had just passed, and I was determined to make a go of it alone. Lucas made sure I got that chance. The story aligned with Abigail's growing impression of Lucas Ross, a man whose actions spoke far louder than his limited words, whose gruff exterior concealed a fundamentally decent nature. You know anything about his personal business in town? Abigail ventured. Mrs. Sullivan shook her head. He keeps his own counsel, but whatever it is, I'd wager it involves helping someone who needs it. That's his way. That evening, after a simple but satisfying supper in the hotel dining room, Abigail retired to her room early, exhaustion from the journey finally catching up with her. The narrow bed felt impossibly luxurious after nights on hard ground, and she fell asleep almost immediately, her dreams a confused jumble of dust storms, bandits, and a pair of steady blue eyes watching over her. The following morning, Abigail rose with the dawn, eager to begin earning her keep. Mrs. Sullivan provided a plain but serviceable apron to protect her dress, and Alina showed her the routine of preparing breakfast for the hotel's guests. The work was straightforward: setting tables, serving food, clearing dishes afterward, and Abigail threw herself into it with determination. By mid-morning, her duties shifted to cleaning vacated rooms and preparing them for new arrivals. The physical labor was actually welcome after days of enforced idleness on horseback, and Abigail found satisfaction in the immediate results of her efforts: disorder transformed into order, dirt banished by soap and water, fresh linens replacing used ones. She was changing sheets in a third-floor room when Mrs. Sullivan appeared in the doorway. "There's someone asking for you downstairs," the older woman announced, a knowing smile playing at her lips. "A certain taciturn cowboy." Abigail's heart leapt embarrassingly at the news. "Lucas is here." In the lobby, looking uncomfortable as a cat in a rainstorm, Mrs. Sullivan waved away Abigail's concern about her unfinished work. "Go on. This can wait." Conscious of her work rumpled appearance, Abigail removed her apron and smoothed her hair before descending to the lobby. Lucas stood near the entrance, hat in hands, looking indeed as out of place as Mrs. Sullivan had suggested. He wore the same trail clothes as yesterday, but had clearly made an effort to clean up his face, freshly shaved, hair damp from washing. "Lucas," she greeted him, suddenly shy despite their days of close companionship on the trail. He turned at her voice, and something in his expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight upturn of his lips, sent warmth spreading through her chest. "Abigail," he replied, "you're looking well. As are you." She gestured to a small seating area in the corner of the lobby. "Would you like to sit?" They settled somewhat awkwardly, the familiar ease of their campfire conversations temporarily displaced by the formality of their surroundings. Lucas placed his hat on his knee, fingers fidgeting with the brim. "How are you finding the hotel?" he asked finally. "Wonderful," Abigail assured him. "Mrs. Sullivan has been most kind and the work is straightforward. I'm grateful for your recommendation." Lucas nodded, seemingly pleased. "Good. That's good." A silence fell between them, not the comfortable quiet of shared trail time, but something charged with unspoken words. Abigail found herself studying his face openly, memorizing details she hadn't fully appreciated during their journey: the faint scar at his temple, the laugh lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested a younger, more carefree life before whatever hardships had shaped him. "Your business in town," she ventured. "Is it progressing well?" "It's concluded," Lucas replied, his expression closing slightly. "Turned out simpler than expected. So you'll be leaving soon?" "Thought I might head out tomorrow," he hesitated, then added, unless there's reason to stay. The question hung in the air between them, its implications both thrilling and terrifying. Abigail felt a precipice opening before her, one path leading to a safe, predictable future as she established herself in Tombstone. The other toward something unknown but potentially profound with this man who had already altered the course of her life. "Lucas," she began carefully, "these past days, I've come to value your companionship greatly." "And I yours," he responded, his voice deepening slightly. "I would be sorry to see you go so soon." The admission cost her some effort, propriety warring with honest emotion. Lucas studied her intently as if searching for something in her expression. Whatever he saw seemed to resolve some internal debate. "Truth is, Abigail, I've been thinking about staying in Tombstone a while longer." Hope fluttered in her chest. "Have you? There's work here. Town's growing fast, needs all kinds of skills." He set his hat aside, leaning forward slightly, "And I find myself reluctant to leave just yet." "Because of your concluded business?" Abigail asked, though she suspected Hope there was more to it. "No." His gaze held hers steadily. "Because of you." The simple declaration sent her pulse racing. "Me? I know it's sudden. We've only known each other a few days, but out there, facing what we did." Lucas gestured vaguely toward the street, toward the desert beyond. "Sometimes you learn more about a person in 3 days of hardship than in years of ordinary acquaintance." "Yes," Abigail whispered, recognizing the truth in his words. "I believe that's so." "I'm not offering anything definite," Lucas continued, his words measured but sincere. "Just time. Time to see if what I think I'm feeling might grow into something more, if you're willing." The unexpected vulnerability in his expression touched Abigail deeply. This man who had faced bandits without flinching, who had navigated harsh terrain with confident skill, now looked almost boyishly uncertain, awaiting her response. "I would like that very much," she replied softly. Relief and pleasure transformed his face. "Then I'll stay, for a while at least." "Have you somewhere to lodge?" Abigail asked practically. Jake Miller mentioned a room above his cousin's hardware store. "It's not much, but it'll do. Will you call on me properly when you're settled?" Lucas smiled, a full, unguarded expression that revealed a glimpse of the man he might have been before life's hardships carved their marks into him. "Yes, madam. With your permission, I'd like to escort you to supper tomorrow evening." "I'd be delighted," Abigail replied, unable to suppress her own smile. "I believe I have that evening free of duties." As Lucas rose to take his leave, Abigail felt a curious sense of rightness settle over her. Her father's mining claims might have been worthless, but they had led her here to this place, this moment, this man whose quiet strength had illuminated a path forward when all had seemed lost. "Until tomorrow, then," Lucas said, taking her hand briefly. "Tomorrow," Abigail agreed, watching as he departed with a lighter step than she had yet observed in him. The days that followed established a new pattern for Abigail's life work at the Continental during daylight hours, and increasingly frequent evenings in Lucas's company. True to his word, he called on her formally the next evening, arriving at the hotel in a clean shirt and newly brushed coat, his manner almost comically proper compared to their days on the trail. Their first official supper together took place at the Grand Hotel's dining room, a setting far more elegant than their previous meals of jerky and hardtack. Over roast beef and potatoes, they began the process of truly knowing one another beyond the necessities of survival. Lucas spoke haltingly at first, then with increasing openness about his life, his childhood in Texas, his service in the Union Cavalry despite his Southern roots. Believed in the cause, not the geography. The restless years after the war when he drifted westward, taking work where he found it. He mentioned a brief, failed marriage in his youth. We were too young, too different, and his gradual disillusionment with the very government he had fought to preserve. The way they treated the Indians after the war, breaking treaties, forcing them onto reservations, it didn't sit right, he explained, his expression darkening. Fought for freedom, then watched that same freedom denied to others. In turn, Abigail shared more of her own history, her sheltered upbringing in Nebraska, her mother's long illness, her abbreviated teaching career cut short by family obligations. She spoke of her father's good intentions but poor judgment, his desperate schemes that had ultimately left her destitute, but ironically led her to Arizona and to Lucas. Perhaps everything happens for a purpose, she suggested as they walked back to the Continental under a canopy of desert stars. If Father hadn't bought those worthless claims, if those men hadn't pursued me, if I hadn't happened along that particular road at that particular time, Lucas continued her thought, his hand warm against hers in the evening chill. Precisely. Abigail paused beneath the hotel's veranda, reluctant for their evening to end. It makes one wonder about fate, doesn't it? Never put much stock in fate, Lucas admitted, but I'm starting to reconsider. The weeks passed with surprising swiftness as autumn edged toward winter, the desert nights growing cooler while days remained pleasantly warm. Lucas found steady work with a local rancher, his skills with horses and cattle earning him a respectable wage. Abigail continued at the Continental, but also began assistant teaching at the local school 2 afternoons a week when the headmaster discovered her education and experience. Their courtship progressed with measured steps, shared meals, walks through town, occasional attendance at church services together, Lucas initially uncomfortable but gradually relaxing into the routine. Mrs. Sullivan observed their growing attachment with evident approval, relaxing her usual strict rules about staff receiving gentlemen callers. "Life's too short and too hard out here to stand on ceremony," she declared when Abigail expressed concern about propriety. "Besides, that man looks at you like you hung the moon. I'd say his intentions are honorable." As November yielded to December, Lucas invited Abigail to accompany him to a small homestead outside town. "There's something I want to show you," he explained cryptically. They rode out on a clear Sunday afternoon, Lucas on Maverick, Abigail on a gentle mare borrowed from his employer. The property lay about 5 miles from Tombstone, a modest cabin set amid cottonwoods near a year-round spring, with several outbuildings in various states of repair and enough land for a small cattle operation or mixed farming. "Whose place is this?" Abigail asked as they dismounted. "Currently." "No one's." Lucas tied the horses to a hitching post, then guided her toward the cabin. "Owner died last month, old-timer named Erickson. No family to speak of." The cabin's interior was simple, but solidly built, 2 rooms with a central fireplace, plank flooring, windows that caught the afternoon light. Dust covered every surface, and a few items of furniture remained, suggesting a hasty clearing of personal effects by whoever had managed the old man's estate. "It's coming up for auction next week," Lucas explained, watching Abigail as she examined the space. "Land, buildings, water rights, all of it," understanding dawned slowly. "You're thinking of bidding on it?" Lucas nodded, an uncharacteristic nervousness evident in his posture. "Been saving for something like this. Not exactly the ranch I pictured, but it's a start. Good water, decent grazing land." "It's wonderful," Abigail said sincerely, seeing not the current dusty disarray but the potential, a home, a future, something built with purpose rather than borrowed or temporary. "There's something else I wanted to ask you," Lucas continued, his voice dropping slightly. "Something important. Heart suddenly racing, Abigail turned to face him fully. Yes. Lucas took both her hands in his expression more open and vulnerable than she had ever seen it. These past months, getting to know you properly. They've been the best of my life, Abigail. I never expected to find someone who would understand me, accept me as I am. Lucas, she began, but he shook his head gently. Please let me finish before I lose my nerve. He took a deep breath. I know I'm not the kind of man your father probably hoped you'd marry. I don't have much to offer except hard work and a promise to always protect you, care for you. Tears blurred Abigail's vision as Lucas continued, his voice growing steadier with each word. If I'm fortunate enough to win this place at auction, would you consider sharing it with me? As my wife? The question hung in the air between them, momentous and transformative. Abigail thought of the desperate young woman she had been just months ago, facing a future that had seemed impossibly dark and hopeless. She thought of the man before her now, who had not only rescued her from immediate danger but had shown her through his quiet strength and unwavering integrity that a different life was possible. Yes, she whispered, then more firmly, yes, Lucas, I would be honored to be your wife. Joy transformed his features as he pulled her gently into his embrace. Their first kiss was tentative, almost reverential, but deepened with shared emotion that had been building since that first desperate day on the desert road. When they finally parted, Lucas rested his forehead against hers, his voice rough with emotion. I promise you won't regret this. I know I won't, Abigail replied with absolute certainty. We've already weathered worse together than most couples face in years of marriage. The auction came the following week. A tense affair held outside the courthouse, with a dozen potential bidders eyeing the Erickson property. Lucas entered the bidding confidently, but Abigail watched with mounting concern as the price climbed steadily, driven upward by a well-dressed businessman from Tucson who seemed determined to secure the land. When the bidding reached Lucas's stated limit, he hesitated visibly, clearly torn between financial prudence and his dream. Abigail, standing beside him, made a swift decision. Reaching into her reticule, she withdrew a small leather pouch containing her accumulated wages from the Continental and her teaching position. Add this, she whispered, pressing it into his hand. It's ours, not just yours. Lucas's eyes widened at the gesture, then softened with understanding. With a decisive nod, he raised his hand again, increasing his bid beyond what the Tucson man seemed prepared to pay. 3 tense minutes later, the auctioneer's gavel fell, and the Erickson property belonged to Lucas Ross. As congratulations came from friends and acquaintances who had gathered to watch the proceedings, Lucas turned to Abigail, his expression a mixture of triumph and tenderness. Our first decision as partners, he said quietly. Thank you for trusting me with your savings. Our savings, she corrected gently. Our future. They were married 2 weeks later in Tombstone's small Methodist church, a simple ceremony witnessed by the friends they had made in their months in town. Mrs. Sullivan, Alina and her family from the Continental, the schoolmaster and his wife, several of Lucas's colleagues from the ranch. Sarah and Jake Miller made the journey from Contention City, bringing a handmade quilt as a wedding gift. Lucas had worked tirelessly in the intervening days to make the cabin habitable, enlisting help from fellow ranch hands to repair the roof, clean the chimney, and ensure everything was in working order. Abigail, with Mrs. Sullivan's blessing, had divided her time between her duties at the hotel and preparing their new home, scrubbing floors, washing windows, arranging the few pieces of furniture they had purchased or been gifted by well-wishers. The morning of their wedding dawned clear and crisp, a perfect December day in the Arizona Territory. Abigail wore a new dress of pale blue cotton, purchased with part of her savings before she had contributed to the land auction. Mrs. Sullivan had insisted on adding a delicate lace collar and cuffs. "Every bride deserves something special, my dear," and had arranged Abigail's hair with white flowers gathered from her small garden. Lucas, for his part, appeared in new clothes as well, a proper suit purchased specifically for the occasion, his usual Stetson replaced by a less weathered hat, his boots polished to an unaccustomed shine. The transformation emphasized what Abigail had come to appreciate over their months together, that, beneath the trail-hardened exterior, was a man of genuine dignity and presence. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful, the familiar words taking on profound significance as Abigail considered their journey to this moment. From desperate flight across the desert to standing hand in hand before friends and community, promising a lifetime together, it seemed both miraculous and somehow inevitable. "I, Lucas, take thee, Abigail." His voice was steady, his calloused hand warm around hers as they exchanged vows. "I, Abigail, take thee, Lucas." Her own voice clear and certain, knowing with absolute conviction that this path, unforeseen though it had been, was exactly where she was meant to be. The celebratory dinner afterward at the Continental, hosted generously by Mrs. Sullivan, brought together their diverse circle of acquaintances, respectable townsfolk alongside ranch hands and miners, all united in well wishes for the newly married couple. Toasts were offered, advice, both practical and humorous, was given, and for the first time since her father's death, Abigail felt the warm embrace of community and belonging. As evening approached, they took their leave amid good-natured teasing and sincere congratulations. Lucas had arranged for a wagon to transport them and their wedding gifts to their new home, the same homestead that had been the site of his proposal. The journey passed in companionable anticipation, both of them quietly absorbing the momentous change in their circumstances. When they arrived at their cabin now, Lucas surprised Abigail by lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. "I may not know all the proper traditions," he said with a smile, "but I know this one." Inside, the transformation from their first visit was remarkable. Clean windows allowed the last of the day's light to illuminate freshly scrubbed floors and newly whitewashed walls. A fire had been laid ready in the hearth, which Lucas quickly kindled into a welcoming blaze. Simple curtains that Abigail had sewn from fabric purchased in town adorned the windows, and the few pieces of furniture, a table with 4 chairs, a cabinet for dishes, a sturdy bed in the second room created the beginnings of a true home. "It's perfect," Abigail declared, turning in a slow circle to take in their domain. "Absolutely perfect." Lucas watched her with undisguised adoration. "It's just a beginning, we'll build on it together." Their first night as husband and wife passed in tender discovery. The initial awkwardness of new intimacy giving way to deeper connection that seemed a natural extension of the trust they had built over their months together. Lucas's strength, so evident in all his actions, was balanced by unexpected gentleness. Abigail's own response surprised her with its intensity, a passion she hadn't known herself capable of awakening under his careful attention. Afterward, lying in the quiet darkness with Lucas's arm around her and his steady heartbeat beneath her cheek, Abigail reflected on the extraordinary turn her life had taken. From the brink of despair to this moment of profound contentment, the journey seemed impossible, yet here she was. "What are you thinking?" Lucas murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best," she replied honestly. If my father hadn't died, if his schemes hadn't failed so completely, I never would have met you. Lucas was quiet for a moment, considering. My grandmother had a saying, God works in crooked lines. Never understood it properly until now. It's true, isn't it? Abigail propped herself up on one elbow to see his face in the moonlight filtering through the curtains. When the bandits attacked my wagon, I thought my life was over. Everything looked so impossibly dark. And now, she smiled, tracing the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. Now I see the path forward, our path together. The months that followed saw their homestead gradually transform from a bachelor's neglected property to a thriving small ranch. Lucas divided his time between paid work for neighboring ranchers and improvements to their own place, repairing fences, expanding the corral, adding a small barn for the milk cow they acquired in early spring. He purchased a few head of cattle with his savings, the beginnings of what they hoped would eventually become a respectable herd. Abigail continued teaching at the Tombstone school, riding to town 3 days a week on the gentle mare that had become hers. The income, though modest, provided necessities while their ranch became established. Her remaining days were filled with the countless tasks of maintaining their home and establishing a productive garden, no small feat in the challenging desert environment. They worked hard, often ending days exhausted but satisfied with tangible progress. Nights brought the reward of shared comfort, their bond deepening with each challenge overcome together, each small victory celebrated as a team. Spring brought welcome rains that transformed the desert briefly into a wonderland of wildflowers. Abigail marveled at the resilience of this seemingly harsh land, its capacity for beauty and renewal when conditions aligned properly. She saw parallels to their own story, circumstances that might appear barren actually containing seeds of potential, merely awaiting the right conditions to flourish. By summer, their homestead had gained a reputation for hospitality among travelers between Tombstone and outlying ranches. Lucas and Abigail rarely turned away those seeking water for themselves and their mounts, often offering a meal and conversation along with practical assistance. This generosity repaid itself in unexpected ways: information about market conditions, offers of help with larger projects, and a growing network of friends and allies in a territory where such connections could mean the difference between success and failure. Their first wedding anniversary arrived with the December chill, celebrated quietly but meaningfully with a special supper and heartfelt gifts exchanged by firelight. Lucas presented Abigail with a silver locket he had commissioned from a Tombstone jeweler, simple but elegant, containing a small photograph of the two of them taken in town the previous month. "It's beautiful," she whispered, immediately fastening it around her neck. "I'll treasure it always." Her gift to him was more practical but no less significant: a handcrafted leather-bound journal with his initials tooled into the cover, filled with blank pages waiting to be filled. "For your thoughts, your plans," she explained as he examined it with evident appreciation. "Your dreams for our future." Lucas smiled, running his fingers over the quality leather. "Never been much for writing things down, but I think I could start." "I hope you will." Abigail hesitated, then added softly, "Perhaps someday our children might want to know their father's thoughts." Lucas's head jerked up at this, his eyes searching hers intently. "Abigail, are you saying?" She nodded, happiness bubbling up within her. "The doctor confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby, Lucas, in early summer." The joy that transformed his face was something Abigail knew she would remember forever: pure, unguarded emotion from a man who had learned through hard experience to keep his feelings carefully controlled. "A baby," he repeated, gathering her gently into his arms. "Our baby. Are you pleased?" she asked, already knowing the answer but wanting to hear it spoken. "Please doesn't begin to cover it," Lucas replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Abigail, you've already given me more happiness than I ever thought possible. And now this." He placed a reverent hand over her still flat abdomen. "It's everything." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter months, with Abigail maintaining her teaching duties until early spring when the journey to town became too taxing. Their neighbors and friends in Tombstone rallied around the expectant parents, offering advice, hand-me-down baby items, and practical help with ranch tasks as Abigail's condition limited her activities. Lucas proved an attentive husband, his protective instincts heightened by Abigail's pregnancy. He took on additional responsibilities without complaint, ensuring she rested adequately while still respecting her determination to contribute meaningfully to their household. Their evenings often found them planning for the future discussions of education for their child, expansions to the ranch, dreams that extended years beyond the immediate concerns of daily survival. "I want our children to have choices," Lucas reflected one night as they sat on their small porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in crimson and gold. "Not just to survive, but to decide what kind of life they want." "They will," Abigail assured him, her hand resting on her now prominent belly where their child frequently made its presence known with vigorous movement. "They'll have your strength and, hopefully, enough of my stubbornness to forge their own path." "Your wisdom, too," Lucas added, covering her hand with his own. "And your kindness." As spring yielded to early summer, Abigail's time grew near. The designated bedroom for the baby had been prepared with loving care, a cradle crafted by Lucas from cottonwood, bedding sewn by Abigail from fabrics purchased in town, small garments contributed by well-wishers or made during quiet evenings by the fire. When labor began on a warm June morning, Lucas rode hard for Tombstone to fetch the doctor and Mrs. Sullivan, who had promised to attend the birth. Their return found Abigail progressing well, her natural composure serving her through the intensifying contractions as Mrs. Sullivan provided experienced guidance and comfort. Lucas, banished to the main room of the cabin by the women's firm insistence, paced anxiously as hours passed, each cry from the bedroom testing his resolve to remain where he had been directed. The doctor emerged periodically with reassurances that all was proceeding normally, but Lucas found little comfort in medical platitudes while Abigail faced her ordeal beyond his reach. As afternoon faded toward evening, a new sound finally pierced the cabin's tense atmosphere, the indignant wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Lucas froze mid-stride, every sense alert as he waited for further news. Mrs. Sullivan appeared in the doorway moments later, her tired face wreathed in smiles. "Congratulations, Mr. Ross. You have a son, a fine, healthy boy." The simple words transformed Lucas's world completely. A son. He had become a father. The responsibility and joy of this new reality washed over him in waves as Mrs. Sullivan ushered him toward the bedroom. Abigail lay propped against pillows, exhausted but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as Lucas entered, her smile so full of love and triumph that his throat tightened with emotion. "Come meet your son," she invited softly. Lucas approached almost reverently, lowering himself to sit carefully beside her on the bed. The infant's face, visible within the swaddling blanket, was tiny and perfect, delicate features, a wisp of dark hair, skin still flushed from the exertion of birth. "He's beautiful," Lucas managed, his voice barely audible, "just like his mother. Would you like to hold him?" Abigail offered, already shifting the precious bundle toward his arms. With uncharacteristic uncertainty, Lucas gathered his son against his chest, marveling at the lightness and the simultaneous significance of this small being. The baby's eyes opened briefly unfocused, but seeming to study his father's face with solemn attention before closing again in newborn exhaustion. "What shall we call him?" Abigail asked, watching the tableau with contented pleasure. They had discussed names during the pregnancy but had reached no firm decision. Now, looking at the child in his arms, Lucas felt a certainty about the right choice. "Thomas," he suggested, "after your father, to honor where our journey began." Tears welled in Abigail's eyes at the unexpected gesture. "Thomas Lucas Ross," she expanded. "A good, strong name for our son." "Perfect," Lucas agreed, gently returning the baby to her arms. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, overwhelmed with gratitude for this woman who had transformed his life so completely. "Thank you, Abigail, for everything. We've come so far," she mused, gazing down at their sleeping son. "From that terrible day on the desert road to this moment. It hardly seems possible. But here we are," Lucas replied simply. "Together." In the years that followed, the Ross family prospered along with their growing ranch. Thomas was joined by a sister, Sarah, 2 years later, and eventually by another brother, James, completing their family. The homestead expanded to meet their needs, additional rooms added to the original cabin, a proper barn replacing the initial structure, orchards and gardens established with Abigail's patient attention. Lucas gradually built his cattle herd to respectable numbers, developing a reputation for fair dealing and quality stock that brought buyers from as far away as California. Abigail eventually established a small school on their property, educating not only their own children but those from neighboring ranches, whose families appreciated the opportunity for learning without sending young ones to town. Tombstone itself weathered the boom and bust cycle common to mining communities, but the surrounding agricultural endeavors, including the Ross Ranch, provided stability that helped the town transition to a more sustainable economy. Lucas and Abigail became respected figures in the community. Their success story, often cited as evidence of what determination and hard work could accomplish in the territory. On warm summer evenings, they would often sit together on the expanded porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard as the desert sunset painted the landscape in spectacular colors. In these quiet moments, they sometimes reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them together: a father's misguided investment, a desperate journey, a chance encounter on a desert road. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come along that day?" Abigail asked once, her head resting comfortably against Lucas's shoulder as they observed 8-year-old Thomas teaching 5-year-old Sarah how to lasso a fence post while toddler James looked on with determined concentration. "Sometimes," Lucas admitted. "But then I look at all this: our children, our home, our life together, and I figure things worked out exactly as they were meant to." Abigail nodded, her fingers intertwining with his. "When you found me, my future looked impossibly dark and hopeless," she mused, echoing thoughts she had shared on their wedding night years earlier. "But you lit a path forward and walked it with me." "We walked it together," Lucas corrected gently. "And we still are." As twilight deepened around them and their children's laughter filled the evening air, Abigail reflected that some journeys, the most important ones, never truly ended. They simply transformed, presenting new challenges, new joys, new opportunities for growth. What had begun as desperate flight had become a purposeful journey towards something built with love and intention: a family, a home, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. "Together," she agreed, her heart full of gratitude for the unexpected turn her life had taken that fateful day when a cowboy had appeared on the horizon and everything had changed. Always together,